All right, after that amazing overtime win on Sunday night, I had to come rocking the Lions jersey this week. But on this episode, we are going to be talking IDP injuries and replacements, IDP Gold versus Fool's Gold, and important IDP snap counts. And as always, this episode is sponsored by IDP Plus. Get more in-depth topics covering IDP, dynasty football, and sports betting, NFL betting. Subscribe today to the YouTube channels IDP Plus Fantasy, IDP Plus Betting, and IDP Plus Shorts, as well as go to idpplus.com, become a subscriber, and take advantage of all of the IDP knowledge that we have to offer. All right, we're going to get into it with our first topic, which is going to be on injuries and replacements. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Nate Cheat and my co-host Ricky Rod66. Ricky, so Kyle Van Noy suffers a fractured orbital bone in the Chiefs opener.
Yes, he did. And while we don't have any reports here early in the week in terms of his availability for the coming week, is likely that he's not available. The name to know, David Ojabo, former second-round pick from Michigan, who's battled injuries since before the combine, is now available and active and actually had a sack in game one. He's the name to look at for a replacement for Kyle Van Noy.
All right, and out of Brazil on Friday night, we had Devin White, who was out for the Eagles opener.
Yes, it was quite the surprise. The team was going to boarding the plane, and all of a sudden word came out that Devin White had an ankle injury and was not boarding the plane and did not go down to Brazil. He was expected to be the green dot alongside with Zach Bowen starting, and we'll talk about him a little later, but Nakobe Dean stepped in for him. There's been no word since then in terms of when Devin White's coming back. Now, Nakobe Dean did not have many counting stats. In fact, when you got to late in the third quarter, he had one assisted tackle. Then all of a sudden, he did pick up late in the third and into the fourth. So a lot of unknowns there. I'd continue to watch the news on this one. I do expect that Devin White, when his ankle is healed, that he will be the green dot in the starter next to Bond. But out of those three, Bond's the man right now.
Gotcha. All right. Moving to Vegas with the Raiders and defensive end Malcolm Kuntz. He heads to IR.
He sure did. He got put on IR. Big loss for the Raiders, and he was one of the folks that we were predicting as a breakout defensive end this year, or edge, depending on your settings for your league. So, but that opened the door for Tyree Wilson, the number one draft choice from Texas Tech last year, who didn't perform like a number one draft pick last year. And quite frankly, Kuntz leapfrogged him, which many people were surprised about. And till even in the preseason, Kuntz was still ahead of Wilson. So Wilson gets his opportunity. He tweaks his knee, his hurt. Charles Snowden will now be the replacement for Kuntz and Wilson, both not someone to have on your radar. He's bounced around from a couple of different teams, but that's the name to keep an eye out that you'll hear about, but not worth adding.
Gotcha. All right, moving to Carolina with the Panthers. Pro Bowl defensive tackle Derek Brown was put on injured reserve on Tuesday after suffering a knee injury in Sunday's game.
Massive loss for the Panthers. Shout out to my Saints, who I actually kind of dogged last week, who just kicked Carolina's you know what. And Derek Brown is one of Carolina's best players. And for them to lose him on top of what the performance they had on Sunday is just going to make matters worse. Carolina and the Giants are going to be fighting for the number one draft pick this coming year already. You can see that now where this is going. But there's really no replacement. Ashawn Robinson had a really solid game against the Saints in terms of putting up a lot of stats, but he's an aging veteran, not someone you're necessarily going to look for from an IDP perspective. So anyway, there's no one to really replace Derek Brown. Unfortunately, if you have him, you're going to be searching other teams and other defensive tackles for a replacement.
All right, let's move north into Buffalo. The Bills corner Taron Johnson was ruled out for Thursday's game against Miami in Monday's practice report. He left the game on Sunday with a forearm injury.
and he's already been rolled out for Thursday night's game against the Dolphins as well. We usually don't typically talk about cornerbacks except for slot cornerbacks, and Teron Johnson is one of those slot cornerbacks who plays basically about 100% of the snaps, and because of his alignment and positioning, scores really well from an IDP perspective. Cameron Lewis came in and replaced him early in the game and had a fantastic game, put up similar numbers to Teron Johnson that he would typically put up. So if you're in a bind and you need someone, and Cameron Lewis may be listed as a safety in your leagues, but Cameron Lewis is going to play that slot position, replacing Teron Johnson with Miami and the way they're going to run the ball or attempt to run the ball. Good opportunity for Cameron Lewis this week as well.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to the next topic here, where we're going to go into IDP players that are gold. So these are gold players. They did really well, and we're going to focus on linebackers and defensive linemen. But I do want to plug here that this will become its own article for subscribers at idpplus.com. Make sure to go there, become a subscriber, read the rest of this, where we will go also into defensive backs. But kicking this off, we're going to talk about the big name, the number one guy for waiver wire pickups, some people are saying, Zach Bond, who had 15 tackles and 2 sacks in this game.
Zach Bowen had a great game, and I just praised my Saints a little bit earlier, and now I'm going to dog them again. They had him for 4 years. In 4 years, including playoff games, he had 2 total sacks with the Saints. The Eagles get him in his first game against a good team like the Packers. He has 2 sacks, and he put up those stats. Vic Fangio is going to know how to use Zach Bowen, put him on the inside where the Saints did not use him and did not utilize him and so forth. Love the way he used him. Love the way he was running all over the field and running around like a madman, making tackles and so forth. He would be number 1 on my IDP list for this week.
All right, let's talk about Tyrell Dodson, who had 11 tackles, 1 for a loss, and 1 pass defense.
So Tyrell Dodson, as we talked about in a previous episode, he was the green dot guy for Seattle. We expected, played 100% of the snaps, which was fantastic, and he was very productive. As we predicted, Mike McDonald coming over from Baltimore, where Baltimore had those very productive inside linebackers from an IDP perspective with Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. Same type of system. Tyrell Dodson, even though he was an undrafted free agent coming out, got him in the right system, right position, putting up points. Someone to target from an IDP perspective.
Gotcha. There we go. All right. So now DeMarvion Overshown, who had 11 tackles, 1 for a loss, and 2 quarterback hits.
So it was expected that DeMarvion Overshown had leapfrogged Damone Clark for the Cowboys going into the season. That's what we expected, but we weren't 100% sure. So we said proceed with caution on this one. Well, it turned out he was the man. He started next to Eric Kendricks, who was the Mike, and Overshown was fantastic. He was a high draft choice for the Cowboys last year. Unfortunately, hurt his knee during preseason, so he had plenty of time to rehab. Rehabbed well. Didn't look like he lost any speed, and he looked really good. So another linebacker opportunity for you. We call him IDP Gold, and he's gold, and expect him to have a great year this year.
Great. Now, moving on to a player that, hey, I drafted and started in the IDP Invitational this week, Keon White, who had 2.5 sacks and 4 tackles.
Another one we talked about previously when Christian Barmore went out with the blood clot issue, and he's now expected to miss most of the year, if not the full year. Barmore is. So Keon White is the man to focus on. Now, I wouldn't expect the 2.5 sacks every week. So don't get too carried away. But Keon White's probably positioned for 8 sacks this year, and he's well on his way to that. And because of his use on the edge and then sliding inside somewhat as well, also positioned well for tackles. So manage your expectations. Don't expect 2.5 sacks every week, but if he doesn't have any sacks this coming week, don't suddenly bench him. Whatever, just be patient, and he will produce for you.
Gotcha. All right, moving over. Let's talk about Gregory Rousseau, who had 6 tackles and 3 sacks.
So I talked about Kuntz as one of our defensive ends / edges to target this year as a breakout. Greg Rousseau was our number 1 breakout from a defensive end perspective. And boy, did he certainly break out against the Cardinals. And it's not easy to sack Kyler Murray, He might be on the shorter side, but he is fast, as we all know. And Russo got him 3 times. He dominated. And so he was a #1 pick several years ago. This is his 4th year. He's maturing. This is a breakout year for him. They don't have a ton of depth as well. He's playing more snaps in addition. Greg Russo, boy, it's gonna be hard to trade for him now after that breakout. If he has a game or two where maybe he doesn't have, 3 sacks, I'd be looking to try and trade for him, particularly in a dynasty.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk Darrell Taylor, who had 8 tackles and 2 sacks.
Okay, I'm falling on the sword here right now on this one because in our last episode, I talked about the fact that Darrell Taylor was just a guy, sort of. He had that one good year from a sacks perspective, but then he had the injuries, and then Seattle was more than willing to let him go. So the thought process was maybe he just wasn't fully recovered from that knee injury. He wasn't even in the rotation in Seattle. So he was just going to be a rotation guy in Chicago. Boy, did he impress. And part of it could be because he has Montez Sweat on the other side of the line, drawing a lot of attention. And Sweat didn't have any sacks, where Taylor had 2. In addition, what nobody's talking about, Gervin Dexter, the defensive tackle for the Bears, he changed his body composition. He improved his speed. He worked on his moves. He was putting pressure in the middle of the pocket as well. A lot of that bodes very well for Taylor and success. Once again, don't expect 2 sacks and 8 tackles every week, particularly from a defensive end. But he's someone that he's worth spending a little bit of your fab dollars on. I wouldn't overspend, but getting a little fab to add to your bench.
All right, and let's wrap this up with Jonathan Cooper, who had 6 tackles and 2 sacks.
Yeah, people don't realize that Jonathan Cooper actually almost had double-digit sacks last year. He was a 7th-round pick out of Ohio State. He was highly touted going to Ohio State, but with some of the depth that they have in Ohio State, he didn't really get a chance to shine quite as much. Denver took a chance on him. He has developed quite well. He is actually starting ahead of a previous 2nd-rounder, Nick Bonito, over there in Denver. So anyway, Cooper is another one. If you can get him, add him to your bench.
Gotcha. All right. So that wraps up our IDP Gold section. Make sure and go to idpplus.com, become a subscriber, read that article so that you get the defensive backs that go with this and a little more explanation in depth into these players. But with that, let's move over to IDP Fool's Gold, where we're going to talk about players who maybe had really great stat lines, but, don't buy into them because of, it's not real. It's going to be a one and done situation. So, Ricky, with that, let's talk about Darius Masau. I'm probably
Muasau.
butchering that, who had 6 tackles, an interception, and played 82% of snaps.
Yeah, so if you listened to us last week, we gave the warning about Micah McFadden, and he was coming off an injury. We didn't know how much he would play. Avoid putting him into your lineup, and we were absolutely correct. If Muasau didn't do well, McFadden was on a pitch count, but Muasau, they were happy with how he was producing, so McFadden didn't get any snaps. However, when McFadden is healthy, expect him to leapfrog. Try saying that twice. Leapfrog, 3rd time. McFadden will be ahead of Muasau. Muasau will not leapfrog McFadden for the 4th time. And so you may see Muasau play a little bit this week as McFadden is still coming back, but expect McFadden to take that role back. Do not overspend on a fab perspective from a waiver wire perspective. Don't do it. Keep in mind, he was a 6th-round draft pick out of UCLA. Granted, he was first 2 years in Hawaii, he was their leading tackler. Next 2 years at UCLA, where he transferred, leading tackler. However, there was a reason he was a 6th-round draft pick. He just didn't have that athleticism. So he'll get some playing time ultimately in special teams, but not someone who will be a long-term solution for the Giants at linebacker.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk Mac Wilson, who had 9 tackles and played 63% of snaps.
So 9 tackles for 63% of the snaps is actually pretty good production. However, that's also unusual production. So it's hard to be fantasy relevant from an IDP perspective with only 63% of the snaps, which is roughly consistent with what the Cardinals did last year under Jonathan Gannon. Similar, Kaiser White was the #1 before he got hurt. Then you had likes of Josh Woods and Chris Barnes playing the 2nd linebacker spot and got roughly 60 to maybe 70% of the snaps. Same thing we have here. Deep leagues, put him on the end of your bench potentially, but outside of that, do not expect that regular kind of productivity from Matt Wilson. There's a reason the Patriots were willing to let him go, and he didn't exactly play a lot of snaps for the Patriots either.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk Henry 2020. 7 tackles, 89% of snaps.
So he played the number 2 role. There was a lot of rumors, and once again, we warned you last week, if you're paying attention, don't go for the Jake Hansen. He's not likely to be the guy. And sure enough, it was not. It was a good old Henry. So he lined up at the number 2 linebacker. Just recall though, the reason he is playing right now, and the only reason, is because Christian Harris got put on IR. So Christian Harris is expected to be back after 4 weeks. There's no reports that it will linger longer than that. 1 week already done. If you're in a bind for a couple of weeks, Henry TT, it could be it could be someone you could pick up, but not someone that will be there all season for you.
All right, let's see if I can pronounce this name correctly. Servasia Dennis.
That's outstanding, Nate.
Yeah, did I do it? Okay, great. So Servasia Dennis, 7 tackles, 1 for a loss, 1 sack off of 36% of snaps.
We just talked about the importance of snap counts and all. That was very, very unusual production and so forth. And the way it worked, so you had Levante David as the number 1 inside linebacker for the Bucks. The number 2 is actually KJ Britt. What was happening though is, in really obvious passing situations, Britt came off the field, Dennis went in. So credit to Dennis that he was so productive, someone to keep an eye on if he can actually improve against the run. Maybe he even surpasses Brett later during the year. However, for now, he is number 3 linebacker for Tampa Bay. Didn't get many snaps. Just be careful about how much you may spend if you go to add him to your bench.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk Patrick Jones. 4 tackles, 2 sacks, 48% of snaps.
Okay, so let's talk about the Vikings edge. They signed Jonathan Grenard, or Greenard, depending on who you ask how to pronounce it. They signed him in free agency. They signed Andrew Van Ginkel in free agency. So that's 2. And by the way, Van Ginkel had a very nice pick 6. Then they drafted Dallas Turner, who some people said was the number 1 defensive player in the draft this past year. Vikings traded up and got him in the draft. That's 3. And then there's Patrick Jones, who's number 4, who's been with the Vikings for several years. If he was that good, would they have signed those 2 other gentlemen, traded up to draft Turner and gave away future draft capital? Probably not. Patrick Jones has been a very inefficient pass rusher who happened to get lucky with a couple of sacks. Remember, it was the Giants. It was Daniel Jones. It was that bad offensive line. It was a blowout. Stay away from Patrick Jones, folks.
Gotcha. Let's talk about Tyquan Lewis. His 6 tackles, 1 sack, and 66% of snaps.
So I could see people getting excited and wanting to spend a lot on Tyquan Lewis of their fab budget. Okay. Remember, Tyquan Lewis just a couple of years ago had a very serious injury, which put him out for the full year. He's going on the age of 30. It's not like in week 1, he got a sack, but he hasn't demonstrated that through all his career. So yes, he got to play more a lot because of Ebukam being injured, but there's still also a rotation going on with Kwity Paye, with Tyquan Lewis, with Deo Odeyingbo, and of course, we didn't even mention Leatu Latu, the number 1 draft pick. So, of course, if you look at the scoring for your league, because he got a sack, he's on the free agent list. He's probably pretty high on the list. Not someone I'm recommending to pick up.
Gotcha. All right, and finally for Fool's Gold here, before we get into some cornerbacks, let's talk about Iku Leota. 4 tackles, 3 for a loss, 1 sack, and 45% of snaps.
Okay, so most of our audience has probably never heard of him, and there's a good reason why. Okay, so Carolina is just that short on talent on the edge right now that they had to give him playing time. And for the Saints to destroy him like they did, just don't expect any kind of good news out of Leota. In fact, the Panthers on Tuesday signed Charles Harris, who went through a whole training camp, couldn't find a job after the Lions released him. He's up there in age as well, and they did it because of their unhappiness. They also had a free agent by the name of Jamie Sheriff or Sharif, I'm not sure, who Seattle cut real early in preseason, who they had on the roster, and they just cut him as well. They're going to be searching for more folks to play. Leota might get a little bit playing time, but no one you want to spend money on your fab.
Gotcha. All right, let's wrap this segment up with some talk about cornerbacks. Ricky, you wanna share some knowledge here?
Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit earlier with Teron Johnson. There are several cornerbacks that had a lot of great stats this past week. Jalen Watson with the Chiefs, for example, Mike Hughes with the Falcons, Jalen Jones with the Colts, et cetera, Riley Moss with the Broncos, all had a tremendous amount of stats. So you can see them probably as free agents in your leagues. They're going to have a lot of points from last week, and you're going to want to jump on them. Reality is, outside corners in particular, it is hard to get that repeat on week over week. It's the slot corners you want to focus on. Mike, none of these folks really played in the slot of any significance in the past week. So while some of them might get picked on, the reality is you still want to focus on those slot corners. So, maybe $1, or maybe if you can bid zero on some of these guys, if you need a cornerback and you want to take a gamble on some of them. But most of these cornerbacks, unless they're playing in the slot, don't target them. Don't spend a lot of money in your fab.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to some important IDP snap counts. We're going to go team by team through some specific, you know, yeah, battles that we've been talking about. Like we're finally getting to see the results of them, and just who ended up benefiting from week one. So we're going to start it off with the Chiefs, who had 80 total snaps on defense.
The Chiefs were on the field a lot because of the Ravens, and so as a result of that, when you have 80 snaps and um, you have 80 snaps and the average is somewhere in the 63 to 65 range. So that's 15 additional snaps that they were on the field for. If you think about that, if that were to continue over 17 games, that's basically like another 2 games worth of defensive stats that the IDPs could accumulate. The 80 was very unusual. The Chiefs have a much better defense than that. Do not expect them to play 80 snaps. Part one, which will hurt the total results for a lot of the IDP players. In particular, the Chiefs played a lot of 12 personnel, 1 running back and 2 tight ends for those that aren't familiar with that. And as a result of that, the Chiefs had 3 linebackers on the field for quite a bit. Leo Chenal, between the significant amount of 12 personnel, along with the 80 snaps, was on the field a lot as the third linebacker, but he only played 60% of the snaps. So he did end up with some very good, total counting stats, as I like to call it. But I wouldn't expect that to repeat because I don't think they'll be facing as much 12 personnel, and I don't think they'll be on the field for 80 snaps a game.
All right. Just look at Baltimore with 54 defensive snaps for the Ravens.
So they weren't on the field. So it was the exact opposite because the Chiefs defense was on the field so much. The Ravens defense was not. And as a result, it impacted some of Roquan Smith's stats, for example. So don't panic about Roquan Smith. Some of that should level out with positive regression towards the 63 to 65 snaps per game. That's part one. Part two, the number 2 linebacker spot was really interesting. So Trenton Simpson played 70% of the snaps. Malik Harrison, who we cautioned to watch out for last week, actually got 28% of the snaps. So they kind of shared time. Now, will over time Trenton Simpson take more of that? I think the probability of that is yes. But what that's saying is in the near future, be really careful about putting Simpson into your lineup. It'll be hard for him to accumulate those stats when he's not playing, as we've talked about so much during this episode, when he's not playing that 90+% snaps.
Gotcha. All right. So let's now shift from Thursday night to Friday night. Let's talk about the Green Bay Packers and their 76 defensive snaps.
Well, once again, way more than the average. So the Eagles were on the field quite a bit. Expect that to normalize over time. And remember, the Packers have a new defensive coordinator with the head coach from Boston College becoming their defensive coordinator. And it's going to take the defense time to come around, but I do have confidence in Hanley doing a better job than Barry, the defensive coordinator from last year. Okay. But Quay Walker played 100% of the snaps, and Isaiah McDuffie, as we warned, we said last week, Edgerrin Cooper, because he missed so much of the preseason, probably wasn't going to play too much, and we were right. McDuffie played 97% of the snaps. Now, as I was watching the game, I saw some things like, boy, more athletic linebacker than McDuffie would have made those plays. And Edgerrin Cooper, he had limited action. He played 14%, but he made a splash in that short period of time. Eric Wilson is the number 3 linebacker, more the Sam kind of thing. Cooper is going to leapfrog McDuffie. It's a question of if, not when. Excuse me, when, not if. Said that wrong. My bad. Um, and so, so McDuffie, if you can find a sucker to trade him to, and if you can get Cooper, go ahead and grab him as well.
Nice. All right. And on the other side of that, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles with their 67 snap counts on defense.
Yeah, we talked about Zach Bowen earlier, and right now, the way he performed from an IDP perspective, with basically around the expected normal of snaps, and the way they utilized him, rushing the passer, they had him on the inside, they put him on the edge a couple of times. He was running all over the field. I see no reason why that can't continue the way they're leveraged him. He is someone that I'm willing to put significant fab dollars on to go out and get. Grab Zach Bowen, folks.
All right. So let's move on to Sunday, and let's talk about Atlanta and the Falcons' 68 defensive snaps.
So the Falcons had 68 snaps, and Caden Ellis basically played 100%. So that was what we're expecting. We were worried and wondering who was going to start next to him. Was it going to be Nate Landman, or was it going to be Troy Anderson? Well, Nate Landman started, but he played only 54% of the snaps. Anderson played 46% of the snaps. So it's a situation to avoid unless one of the two ends up becoming more that 80, 90% type of linebacker next to Caden Ellis.
Gotcha. All right. And out of Minnesota with the Vikings, they had 70 defensive snaps.
Yep. And of course, they had a blowout. So late in the game, Blake Cashman, who wore the green dot, who had played basically 100% of the snaps till the blowout happened and they pulled him out of the game. And then Ivan Pace came in, who many thought might have been the green dot, maybe, and thought that he would be the number 1 and Cashman would be the number 2. Well, it wasn't. Cash was number 1, Pace is number 2. Pace only got up to 54% because he stepped into Cashman's role late in the game and picked up a few extra snaps. Pace is someone, because Cashman is injury prone, I'd love to have him stashed on my bench, but not someone you can afford to play right now.
Gotcha. All right. Let's look at Pittsburgh and the Steelers. They had 56 defensive snaps.
So on the low side, and Patrick Queen had basically, while he's a new number 1 linebacker they paid a lot of money for, he basically didn't have any counting stats, folks. So don't fret. There'll be more snaps in the future, more than 56. Atlanta's offense was just horrid. If you watch any of that game, Kirk Cousins was terrible. Okay. So that aside, don't give up on Queen. On the other hand, Peyton Wilson, 43%, Landon Roberts, 41% of the snaps. So that was basically a timeshare. Roberts more in the rush down, Peyton Wilson more in the passing downs type of thing. With those kind of percentages, can't afford to play either one of them. I'd just stay away from them. I love Peyton Wilson for dynasty, but right now for this year, probably not going to get to use him a whole lot.
Gotcha. All right. And out of New York with the Giants, they had 55 defensive snaps.
And we talked about that earlier because they got blown out so bad and Vikings were scoring so quickly and so forth. They didn't play a lot of snaps. We talked about McFadden is the person you'd rather have over no, I can't say it, Muasau.
All right. And then with the Chargers in LA, they had 60 defensive snaps.
This one was one of the biggest surprises of the weekend, as it looked like there was this rotation thing going on, ring around the rosy, 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1 you're out, 3 you're in. Okay, now 2 you're out, 1 you come back in. So Denzel Perryman, Deion Henley, who we expected to be the 2 starters because Junior Colson missed so much of the preseason because of a appendectomy situation. Well, they got him on the field. Now it was successful for them as well. Their run defense versus how they did last year, much improved on the new mentor system, who Harbaugh brought with him from Michigan. So this is something I don't think you can afford to play any of the 3 unless you're absolutely desperate. Maybe at some point down the line it becomes just 2 of them. I think that will happen, and I think it will be when Denzel Perryman ultimately gets hurt, as he seems to do it every year. So as soon as Perriman gets hurt, I'm trying to jump on Henley and Colson, like white on rice, green on grass. Take your pick. And if you could stash one of those two on your benches somewhere, do so, but don't put them into your starting lineups.
Gotcha. All right, let's move over to Miami and the Dolphins. They had 53 defensive snaps.
I still don't know how Jacksonville lost that game. Well, I do know because there was a great punch out of Etienne 1 yard from crossing the end zone, which would have given them a 20 into the end zone, which would have given them a 24-7 lead and put that game away. And then right afterwards, a hill bomb, boop, and it's now a 3-point game. So that happened that fast. That all aside, because we're here to talk about IDP, what was really great is while it was low on the snap side, 53 snaps, the two inside linebackers, David Long, Jordan Brooks, both played 100% of the snaps. Bodes well for both of them. David Long wore the green dot. So if you had to prioritize one of the two, go with the green dot. But they both, David Long, but they both played 100% of the snaps.
Gotcha. All right. And let's talk about Jacksonville and the Jaguars, who had 71 defensive snaps.
So they played a lot of snaps, and I was so surprised when Oluokun wasn't on the field for a lot of the snaps, and Devin Lloyd wasn't on the field for a lot of the snaps. Oluokun only played 83%. Devin Lloyd only played 74%. And I'm like, what in Jacksonville is going on? Particularly when Oluokun is always one of the leading tacklers over the last several years. So I heard Mike Dempsey, who does work for Jacksonville radio, for the Jaguars, but also does the Football Diehard show in Sirius XM. And Mike talked about the fact that it was extremely hot. It was about 100 degrees, and it was probably even hotter on the field. And there's a feeling that they were rotating them out to try and keep them fresh for late in the game, particularly chasing those speedy Miami Dolphins runners and receivers. So as it starts cooling down, I don't think we'll have to worry about that problem anymore. Play Oluokun and play Lloyd with confidence.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk Tennessee Titans and their 56 defensive snaps.
They were on the low side, and Will Levis had the, I don't know, meme of the week with what the heck what I did when I throw that pick six, kind of like, on his knees. But I digress. So Kenneth Murray played 100% of the snaps. He was the green dot as we expected. Of course, Tennessee traded for Ernest Jones right before the season started, and we talked about last week that Ernest Jones would have to learn the defense, and he had a little bit of a knee issue. And as we expected, there was a little bit of a platoon that happened. Gibbons had 55% of the snaps. Ernest Jones had 45% of the snaps. So over time, I do expect Jones to leapfrog. Boy, I'm having trouble with leapfrog today. To leapfrog past Gibbons, but in the meantime, I don't think you could play either one of them until we see something a little bit more definitive. So maybe someone will give up on Ernest Jones. Maybe you can have an opportunity to grab him and stash him. Jack Gibbons, because of Jones's knee, I wouldn't be afraid to necessarily stash him on my bench either, but none of them should be in your lineup right now. Neither of those two, excuse me. Murray is okay to put in your lineup.
Gotcha. All right, so let's look at Cleveland and the Browns for 60 defensive snaps.
So JOK, Jeremiah Owusu Karamoa, and I probably butchered that, played 100% of the snaps, something that Cleveland fans have been calling for 2 years. They were hallelujah. They paid him for 100% of the snaps. Not that it made a difference in the game as they got blown up by the Cowboys, but he played 100% of the snaps. What was really surprising is that Hicks, the middle linebacker, who they signed, who was expected to be the green dot, only played 72% of the snaps. So that was shocking. So Browns have rotated their linebackers quite a bit in the past, and even under Jim Schwartz last year as well, and he did a fantastic job. But the thought was, Hicks would get roughly 100% of the snaps. That's why they signed him, and JOK would probably get 85%. So major changes and major shifts there. I am not feeling comfortable playing Hicks at all. And remember, Hicks is also over 30 as well. So keep that in mind. So Hicks is someone I'm looking to dump, trade, whatever, for some value of some sort if you can. JOK is the one playing 100%, and I didn't hear of any injuries that would indicate why they would play Hicks less. I'd stay away from Hicks, and I'd actually look to trade him if I had him.
All right. Well, and finally, as part of this segment, we're going to talk about the Detroit Lions and their 78 defensive snaps.
Shocking that you would want to talk about the Detroit Lions, Nathan. Just absolutely shocking. What was really even more shocking was Alex Anzalone playing 100% of the snaps. And Nathan, do you know who played the second number of snaps at linebacker?
Derek Barnes.
Derek Barnes. That is absolutely correct. You win the prize tonight. Jack Campbell was third, and a distant third. So I have to admit, one of our forecasts was Jack Campbell taking over as the green dot. Jack Campbell taking over and playing 100% of the snaps. As Anzalone was getting older, he would still start, but not play, maybe play as much snaps. And boy, this one was a complete surprise. I can't put Jack Campbell in your lineup. I don't think Derek Barnes is good enough worth picking up and stashing on your bench. Continue to play Anzalone with great pride and happiness, but the others, Campbell, wait on, and Barnes, I'm not chasing.
All right. Well, there you have it. We've got another episode in. Hopefully, you're learning a little bit more about IDP and how to be successful in your IDP league. Make sure that you are checking out idpplus.com, as well as following us on Twitter. I'm at Nate Cheat. Ricky is at RickyRod66. Follow the main account, which is at IDP_plus. And see our other YouTube videos at the end of this show. We do link a couple other resources that you can check out, as well as we have to give a shout out to Fantasy Football Advice Network, where we are, broadcasting out of. And with that, we'll be back next week with more IDP advice.